that's a conversation starter. So how's the weather like?
Where
are you? Where are you at? Let's start with that.
I'm in the southern part of the United States. So I'm in a town called Charlotte, which is in North Carolina, a state called North Carolina. And at the moment I'd have to track, calculate it in Celsius. It's 50 degrees Fahrenheit right now and a little bit overcast. So I'm sure much more than it is in Rotterdam right now.
Okay, so far for the weather. I mean, thanks for the update. I see we are live, so we'll start officially. So welcome everybody to our Dept Talks on 5 success factors in commerce. Today we are very happy to have as our guest a vice president and principal retail analyst from Forrester. She's an expert on e-commerce, omnichannel retail, consumer behavior, and trends in the online shopping space. She's also an authority on technology developments that affect the online commerce industry and vendors that facilitate online marketing and merchandising. I hope I pronounced everything right. It's quite a mouthful. I'd like to welcome Sucharita Kodali. Good to have you here.
Great, thank you, Bart. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, great. So hopefully, we're going to be enjoying ourselves a little bit in the coming 30, 35, 40 minutes max, hopefully, with discussing some of the success factors and the trends and the topics that we see in commerce. And typically, we would like to walk through 5 items, one step at a time. And typically, as Dept, we do have, we watch the trends, and we do have some experience with our clients that we would like to highlight. But I think first and foremost, we would also love to hear your reflection on that, and put what we see in a broader industry perspective. I think you are in a great position to reflect on that, Sucharita. And then if there's anyone from the audience who would like to get into the conversation, you're much welcome. Just put it in the chat on whichever platform you are, and we'll try to pick it up and bring it into the conversation. So we're very open to get that in, and otherwise we'll just keep on talking. So let's go to the first topic. Sucharita, would you like to kick things off?
Great. Yes, thank you, Bart. So for those of you who are attending, thank you so much for being here. Hopefully this is a good, kind of exploration of different aspects of commerce that have worked for other companies. So we know that the pandemic has really upended, of course, everybody's lives. It's upended commerce and retail. And what Bart and I did is that we looked really carefully at some case studies of what companies were doing to thrive in the middle of all of the changes that have happened. And one of the first, of course, that we've spent a lot of time, even prior to the pandemic, talking about is the concept of omnichannel, and in particular, being agnostic to how consumers want to get information. And the first example we have here is an illustration from a Dutch company called bol.de. Some of you may already be familiar with it because it is, I think, the largest e-commerce player in the Netherlands. It's a multi-category player. And one of the things that they did in the last few months in the toy category in particular was some offline support of the online channel. And Bart, why don't you walk through what these guys did and the impact that it had on their toy business?
Yeah, thanks. And I'll have to politely correct you there a little bit, Sucharita, because it's bol.de would mean our German neighbor friends. And
I stand corrected.
It's that's okay. That's okay. We love them as much as we love everyone. So so typically in our experience in the last couple of years, when we were discussing omnichannel, it was always about combining bricks and clicks, right? It's how do we combine the physical retail presence with what's happening online. And I think that's a little bit of a narrowed down sort of definition of omnichannel, because originally we should be talking about how do you combine all the possible touch points on all channels, physical and online, and integrate them into a seamless customer experience. And that's why we love this example. It's just one example of it, of bol.com, where they launched their printed toy guide, which is basically it's a really old concept, right? It's literally, when I was young, there was another big toy retailer who did that every year, and it was a legendary book. As a kid, you looked out to it, and you were browsing it for weeks on end and looking at all those glossy, stuff that you wanted, and you dreamt about it. So I think Bol has taken over this torch, but they added a unique digital touch to it, and especially in this stay-at-home days, thinking about combining the physical and the online in such a way with a catalog-based experience. I think it's a great initiative. Funny enough, they launched this way before the Corona crisis hit. So I don't know, it was maybe just good foresight or whatever. But a couple of the elements that make it digital and make it stand out, and I think were really well thought out here, is what they did with the priceless QR shopping, which enables you to, and also enables the kids to look at products and not be bothered by the price, because if kids look at a price, they want the most expensive one, whilst if there's no prices, they're happy with something that costs 50 cents, right? Another thing is the augmented shopping experience, where we would enable to get products come to life from the page. We launched a specific kids app that kids could play around with, create their shopping list with, and really experience the products that they were looking at. And lastly, also in theme with the stay-at-home days, is the poster challenge to be put up on the windows, and reaching and giving a sort of a social reach to this campaign, which worked really well, because the toy category, Bol is by far now a category leader in the Netherlands on this, and they've sort of completely taken over the market here. So that's that's what we see happening, and I think this is a great example of new thinking about combining physical and digital. Any thoughts that you have on this, Sucharita? What do you see happening, and with other examples?
Yeah, and we can, on the next slide, there is some data that, or at least some high level insights. So some of the things that I think are really important. So this is a concept that, Bart, as you said, has been around for a long time. I used to work at Toys R Us, which was the largest toy retailer in the US, and they would release a big book every holiday season, and it was wildly popular, and it drove a lot of traffic to stores. That's not the reason I mentioned it. Amazon actually has done the same thing. But the reason that I think that this is important is that retailers, and particularly marketers, have leaned really heavily into digital marketing, in particular paid search, social media ads. But when we ask consumers across different markets, and this is what is really reflected here, we have some data from from some European markets, we have it from US. When consumers have to say what's the least effective advertising technique, what do they not pay attention to? It often is, unfortunately, digital ads. On the other hand, when asked, what do you pay attention to? It's often the offline traditional media. It's everything from outdoor advertising to ads in magazines to direct marketing. So many of those traditional forms still resonate tremendously. And that's the reason that I think that we don't want to let go of what's traditional, because it's often very effective. So on the second big thing that we want to talk about today, and we're going to try to rush through this because we have a lot of things to talk about, is this concept of digital showrooms and buying and planning digitally. We're in a world now where, unfortunately, we're not traveling as much, and the buying and planning functions within organizations are not conducted in the way that they used to be. But here's an example of a company that has moved that process of buying and planning digitally, and I thought that it would be interesting for Bart, you to walk through exactly what Ghani is doing.
Yeah, so Ghani, as some of you might know, it's a fashion. It's quite a forward-looking fashion brand. It's quite special from Denmark. It sits right in the mid to high end, And yeah, as you said, Sucharita, they, last March when everything collapsed, basically, they had the problems where they typically depend on the trade shows and getting all the buyers of the big retailers, getting them in, showing the new collection. And there's this big drops, coming periodically. And they just had no way to really communicate the brand value, to communicate the ideas of the new collections, which is important. And typically when they were thinking about setting up B2B commerce experience, but typically when you think about B2B commerce, people think about big tables for massive order entry, or rebuying the same as last year. So quite boring stuff, basically. So what we did is rethink that and come up with a B2B experience to communicate the values of the brands. It's completely fresh. It is showing what's in the drop. It is containing all the lookbooks, how you combine it, etc. So it gives a great inspiration to the buyers, and they've had massive well response. And I'd like to show you through some of the work, and it's really heavy on design and interaction and some quirkiness. So the concept is Dida's desktop from the 90s. Dida is the CMO of Ghani, and we recreated the original 90s Mac OS experience, fully functional in browser. You can play around with it, and it's actually what has been on her desktop. But that alone is not enough. It is containing all the. It says cookbook here. It needs to be lookbook. Sorry about that. It is containing all the elements that are important for buyers to know how they need to communicate and how they need to work with this collection, and they can play around with it. But it's also containing all sorts of quirky surprises where when you work with this, all of a sudden you're moving into a hamster dance, and this sort of stuff is moving around the screen. So really heavy on design, really heavy on concept, but in that way communicating the brand. And I think what's special about this is, we try to pull B2B commerce away from boring.
Right.
Sucharita.
The things that I think are really interesting about this is that even prior to COVID, we started to see companies, and there were a few players in this space, like Jor was one, New Order is another, that were digitizing these back office functions. They were enabling digital line reviews. They were allowing you to dynamically see how making different buys was affecting your open to buy figure, which I think is just really bringing a lot of the customer experience that we know from a business to consumer standpoint and bringing it to B2B. It is something that we've seen a lot of department stores, especially the high-end ones around the United States, integrating into their buying and planning processes. It's much more efficient. It reduces travel, and it lets you get a picture holistically. And it even lets buyers see lines all at once across different departments. So if you're, too heavy into a particular color or particular theme, it's much easier to see this visually, and you can lean in or lean out of different selections based on what your goals may be. So this to me seems like this is a no-brainer, particularly for multi-category merchants, especially in the future. Our third point that we want to talk about next is the idea of virtual selling, and perhaps one of the biggest kind of themes covered in shopping in the last year has really been the idea of live shopping, particularly because it has been quite popular in China. We've seen a number of particularly small merchants embracing live shopping through social channels. Live shopping has been around in various forms, like companies like QVC and HSN, but how companies are embracing it in an e-commerce world, I think is what is really interesting. And Bart, you have an interesting example to walk us through here, right?
Yeah, so it is interesting indeed. I think you mentioned it right. It's been around for a while, especially popular in China and other Asian countries, where you see a lot of KOLs and other cohorts of influencers working their way. And I think what is special in that, what makes those markets unique is that, that they have these super apps with all these tight integrations, and everything is tied into that. So it's really easy to integrate the transaction and identity and the product, and have it all into a single seamless user flow. And I think, the big social platforms here in the West have been, ramping up and building this all in the last year. So there's been a platform enablement where we can go the same way. And we've been, I wouldn't say experimenting with it. We've been building some live shopping experiences for Chibo and Douglas in Germany, and we see great results with it. The thing is, and what is really what we really need to think hard about is how to scale this, right? Because what you typically see is your brands and retailers in the West. They have a really tight control on the brand experience, and so the production value of these live shopping experiences is typically quite high. It's studio setting, it's professional. It's quite a different look and feel than the massive the massive number of influencers you could typically see on WeChat. It doesn't look like anything, but it works. But that's just something that will not fly here. So I think the big question is, and I think the interesting question is, how do we scale this up? How do we involve influencers here? How do we get retailers who have all their physical stores closed now? There's just so much potential of their great service employees who typically would work the floor. How can we leverage that, and how can we enable them in this flow and still maintain control of the brand and give a good and solid experience to the users? I think that is really difficult. And yeah, I don't know, Sucharita, do you see any examples here in the West where brands or retailers have tackled this?
Yeah, and this example here that we're looking at is Chibo, right, Bart? Is that correct? Yeah, and if we were to look in the West, I mean, really the best in class are QVC and HSN, and they have global presences, and they've been doing this for years. They're multi-billion-dollar businesses, and there are elements of their playbook. A lot of it is about limited quantity selling. It is professional production value. They have professional salespeople. I mean, there are personalities who are extremely skilled at knowing. And that's something that we've even heard in China, is that there are certain people who, kind of you put them on camera and that's their thing, is that, kind of this personality is there designed to sell whatever it is. Well, it could be a car, it could be, kind of a parka. So I do think that that's the bar that's been set, and it is hard for a lot of brands to understand how they can participate in that kind of a world where the only examples we have are of semi-professional productions. However, what I will say is that there are some companies, there are some solutions. Comment Sold in the US is one. There are other providers that are essentially allowing, like for instance, store associates to live stream themselves and showcase kind of products that could be live streamed on a social network like an Instagram or a TikTok, but also. Another thing that we're seeing is also leveraging video even for one-to-one selling. That's something that we heard particularly in apparel early in the pandemic, where the stores may have been closed, where the idea was, well, take your best sales associates and let them still be working in the store and essentially, have a FaceTime type of engagement with a consumer that may have a question or may want to see or have, better understand a particular product that store associate can help them with. So I think that, that's something that is worth experimenting with and absolutely worth considering. We've seen a lot of smaller retailers, particularly like boutiques, embrace more of this because they have nothing to lose and everything to gain because they're already.
And And it's easier to organize for them, obviously, because if you're a store owner, you're the expert and the entrepreneur and everything yourself. So it's becomes a little bit easier to maintain the quality instead of rolling it out over thousands of store assistants, right?
Exactly, because then you run into all kinds of quality control issues and training issues, and you may need to designate, kind of only certain people as allowed to do that. Yeah. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's the whole consistency piece is the challenge for sure.
Have you seen examples where retailers would do this at scale? Because you say, retailers have been experimenting with them, especially in fashion or apparel. Have you seen examples where they push this through at scale, or has it just been experiments? Just curious.
I haven't seen necessarily very much that is live, and I haven't seen too much that's focused on product. We've seen Nike and some players that have content, like for instance, they've done a ton of live streaming through the pandemic of exercise videos. And they have, they're semi-professionally produced. I think they are professionally produced, and they have certain designated athletes that, kind of clearly have strong camera presences that are part of that. But in terms of, kind of more organic, kind of letting a store associate, kind of just basically live stream themselves, we haven't seen too much of that. And, but if anybody, even in the audience, has any great examples, do share, because I think that we're all eager to see how this can be embraced because, of the growth of social video.
Yeah, I see a comment of Tom Remy where it says it's like the modern telcel, like live shopping. And I think, when we were pre-discussing this with Sucharita, we were discussing also the 90s where, we were, airtime was basically filled with telselling, that's basically what's also happened in China, right? Where there's just a lot of it's entertainment.
Right, exactly. And that's one little disclaimer to all of the sales, the telesales in China, is that they don't have as many streaming options as we do in the US. So even if when we do release more live selling, it may not be quite the blockbuster that it is in some of the Asian markets because of all of the alternative forms of entertainment that we have. The fourth point here that we have on our list, and this is really important. It's about hero products, and the reason that this is important is that one of the biggest themes in commerce in the last several years has been the idea of recommendation engines and personalization and integrating all this data mining into what you ultimately showcase. But yet there are a number of merchants and brands that have essentially really shallow product solutions. They're only selling a handful of things. And in that world, the idea of like leveraging tons and tons of personalization or data that is extremely excessive is probably a bit of overkill. And that's where the idea of going back to focusing on the customer experience and just making sure that the content that you're showcasing is as compelling as possible is something that I feel has been overlooked. Bart, can you walk through this next example? It's actually a hardware product from Google that I think illustrates this point particularly well.
Yeah, I think it's a great introduction. It's the value of design, of UX, and of craft. As opposed to all the data and tech and all the channel stuff that we're talking, I think 80 or 90% of the time we're talking about that. But if you have just a very limited number of, we've been building the Google Store where in the last 5 years Google has been developing the Pixel brand and the Google brand as a helpful, thoughtful brand. Bringing emotion and meaning to the products, to how they can enrich your life, how they fit into your life, and they did it by telling a story. And funny enough, and it did the devil is in the detail of the craft to combine to design an interface that when you navigate it, it feels like it's a story is developing in front of your eyes. While you think you're in control because you swipe it, etc. But in a way, it sort of controls you, and the smoothness, the richness, how things open up to you is really it's really a sort of master storytelling that's going on. And when you think about commerce and all the things you do, step away from technology for once and skill and platforms, etc., and think about design and how that can build the brand. I think that's the central message. It's quite, we were discussing whether we should take this thing into this talk, because it feels so sort of old-fashioned in a way. But I think that's also the strength of it, where don't forget about if you build something, if you pay attention and you invest in the UI, in the craft, in the story, making sure people can learn about the products, can explore them, and it really feels like shopping should give you the same good experience as actually using the product. That's basically the story behind it. It is building the brand, because Google went from nothing in the hardware space to the level of experience of almost, dare I say, Apple. It's almost Apple-esque in a way, the experience of the store that they've built. So that's quite an achievement, and it lifted the brand.
Right. And what I will add is that this has basically been the playbook of a lot of the digitally native, vertically integrated brands that we have seen grow in the Western markets. And for those of you who may not be familiar with them in Europe, it's companies like Allbirds or Everlane or Away.com, where they just started online. They had very, very shallow assortments, and they focused on just product design and the look and feel of the website above all. The other pieces that are important to think about with respect to this is that we're heading toward a world where there's less and less data that you're going to be able to get from third parties anyway. So this notion of being able to collect as much first-party information and be a destination that you can understand how people navigate, what they're looking for, and the assets are also repurposable for other social media, which means that they do have to be very visually appealing. It just can't be, kind of some crappy photo that was taken on an iPhone. It does need to be professionally produced in order to get the most out of it. So all of those things I think are important. And I just wonder how much we will have as an industry to pivot back away from this notion of data-driven merchandising to actually more visually driven merchandising. And that brings us to one final point here, which is the idea of leveraging marketplaces as a support role within all commerce operations. And in particular, as we have seen the pandemic wreak havoc, particularly on small businesses and individual sellers, what marketplaces have enabled is often the ability to reach broader audiences, both from a B2B standpoint as well as a B2C, B2B and B2C. And there are a couple of niche marketplaces in particular that I thought would be interesting inspiration for everyone, because when we think of marketplaces, we often think of Amazon or eBay or Alibaba, or regionally we may think of like Zalando or others in different regions around the world. But marketplaces have captured a tremendous amount of venture capital funding. Andreessen Horowitz actually has a list of 100 marketplaces that they're keeping track of every year. I'd encourage you to take a look at it if you want to see all the variety of different marketplaces that are there. Two in particular that have gained some funding and have interesting points of view. One is called Fair, and that was started by X Square people. And it's basically about showcasing products to from SMBs to sellers. And the other is a little marketplace called Jane, which also picked up a lot of funding. And what they have done is that they allow local boutiques to basically showcase their products on these marketplaces. And it has a little bit of a flavor of Etsy. And they also combine it with a little bit of a drop model where everything is limited time and limited inventory. So Bart, I'll let you share your thoughts on this too, because I know that this is an area of passion that you've heard a lot about from clients.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, right? Because we, as Dept, we have a quite a strong part of our business is on helping brands sell on Amazon. So focus on a single marketplace, basically for the last couple of years. And we see this shift happening as well, and especially as you mentioned it, if you are a more niche retailer or a more niche brand with unique product, with bespoke product, with high value add, with the service, you have, you might, for instance, also have sales staff or advisory staff or that could help one-on-one or one-to-many, and you really want to leverage that. You don't want to, building your own property and getting your own foot traffic online is really tough, really expensive. You'll be left somewhere in a dark corner. So that's very difficult. On the other hand, going on Amazon, you'll be crushed. And in a way, in a way, also Amazon, there's a lot of pressure on price. We all know that, and that's also difficult if you're a high value add, more boutique, more niche seller. So we are looking very hard at differentiating our offering here and making sure that we can select and advise and work with the fitting marketplace for your proposition and for your brand. And I think that's going to be part of the magic as well. It's no longer like, okay, you want a marketplace, you either go to bol.com or Amazon only. And I know I should be careful saying this because Bol is a very respected client and we love their marketplace, but there's going to be other marketplaces as well. Yeah, I think that's development that's really relevant for us. Yeah, as we're moving also into more specialty brands, fashion brands, high-end fashion brands like the Gunnies, we'll be working with them on getting them onto the right marketplaces and not to any marketplace. So yeah, any last comments on that, Sucharita?
No, I think that different brands are going to employ different strategies in the future, and there's not a one-size-fits-all, solution. And kind of you have some great examples here. StockX is a great one. There's another one called Goat, which are very, very specifically for sneakerheads and people who are collecting athletic shoes. And that audience, it's there are elements of authenticity and community that they've been able to build that some of their counterparts that are larger, like say an eBay, have not been able to capture. So I think that kind of the idea of vertical marketplaces is absolutely one to watch, and that is something that can supplement retailers with very specific product niches. It can supplement boutiques and small brands, and it can ultimately help small sellers who are trying to reach a different audience as well.
Okay. So yeah, I think we're going to wrap up the 5 topics. I see one question coming in right now. Just right now, I'm going to read it out loud and at the same time think about it. So I hope I can think on my feet here. How ready are B2B companies to adopt the 5 key success factors you have been discussing here today? We know that B2C expectations and experiences are not reserved for B2C purchases. That's a great question. I think so let me try to give an answer there first, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well, Sucharita. But the way we see it is there's been this last year has been a great catch up of B2B. There's been tremendous developments in terms of how do we keep this ship afloat? How do we move our processes, our sales, our inventory? How do we get everything connected and online and digital instead of relying on sort of the old trades where people would travel and the trade shows, etc. And I think if they weren't ready, most of them are, everyone's awake now, is working on it, and I think developments are quicker than many people think. There's a lot of stuff happening sort of in the underbelly of the iceberg there. So it is for us strategically as Dept we are focusing a lot of B2B commerce, and we see some great developments there. So I think the momentum is building, and it's going quite fast. Businesses that are not going to be on board are going to be, because I think this situation we're in is going to last quite long, unfortunately, even still, and they're going to have a really tough time.
Right. And Forrester has actually been talking about this concept of, not to over exaggerate, but the death of the B2B salesperson for quite some time. And a significant part of the reason for that is because of these digital tools that allow selling, especially for low value interactions where you're just maybe demonstrating a product, or you're trying to showcase, kind of the breadth of a product line, or your order taking. And all of those things are absolutely well suited to digital. So I would say all of these are absolutely have B2B analogs. Some of them are straight up B2B, like the showroom. Now, the question about augmented reality, I think that it's still very early. And the places where we see it are in furniture. We see it to some degree with apparel. There are companies like Third Love in the US that use apparel. They use augmented reality in the phone to be able to measure your size for some apparel. And we've sometimes also seen it on packaging, where augmented reality can enable you to find more information about product. Bart had the example through the toy catalog from Bowl earlier. So it's emerging. The consumer data shows that people don't think about it quite, top of mind yet. So the use cases are being built out, but it hasn't really been adopted yet. So I think that that's the challenge, is that it's early, but it will very likely evolve in the next 5 to 10 years.
I couldn't agree more with you there. And nothing to add there. It's definitely not mainstream there, but I think the use cases that you specify out, especially in furniture, are, IKEA is doing some great work there. Obviously, everyone's aware of that. So I think that's gaining traction. The devices are getting ready. The iPhone 12s have the LiDAR built in. So it's getting there, but it's definitely still early days. I think, one thing to consider, all this stuff really depends on building good data. If you are, whichever product category you're in, if you want to leverage augmented reality, already you can start working on, getting a digital 3D catalog catalog of all your models of all your products. So you'll need it anyway. So get the content, get the databases, and then you can start experimenting with it at scale. Because typically, and one of the things I'd like to stress, if you look at the Bol.com toy book, the difficulty obviously is in the front end, but again, the iceberg is getting all the content right of all the SKUs and getting it all connected. And that's just a massive load of work. So we have time for one very last question. Sucharita, did you already pick one, or should I pick one?
Any areas with a specific focus on sustainability in retail. And I think that certainly we're hearing about that in fashion. And if you do have sustainable practices, we have encouraged everybody to showcase it and promote it on, your website and your packaging. I think that that's where the gap is that there are actually a lot of companies doing things that are very socially responsible, but they haven't shared the stories. And when we think about I wouldn't narrow it just to sustainability. There's also the concept of social responsibility, and that can be everything from, are you paying fair wages? Are you supporting the communities that you're in locally? Do you treat suppliers fairly? All of those things are equally important to consumers, not just environmental sustainability and packaging.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, Sucharita, I suspect this is going to be working all the way up and down the supply chain. So we have decided to apply for B Corp status, which obviously that's an ESG status where you focus on diversity, inclusion, and community and sustainability. So all the aspects that you were mentioning, because what we see is, the best brands in the world will be demanding that, either from all their suppliers, and we want to be in the forefront of that. And I think that's going to have a ripple effect, because everyone's going to be demanding it from everyone. So I think there's going to be a lot of push and pressure in the coming 2-3 years when we start to rebuild our economies, and hopefully we'll have the brains to do it in a good way this time. So let's hope for that. So thanks everyone for watching, and especially a big thanks to Sucharita. I love this conversation. We can, hopefully we'll do it again quickly. And thanks everyone for watching and putting in the questions in the chats. Sucharita, any last comments from your end?
No, thank you all so much for staying with us through this. And please share any comments or feedback. And thank you, Bart, for having me here today.
Okay. Thanks all, and to the next time.